Invite the next speaker, and at the end of the all the three presentations, if we have time, we will go for a question and answer session. The next speaker is Dr. Vatcharapol Sukhotu. He holds a PhD in industrial engineering, specializing in operations research from Texas A&M University. He has a master's in industrial engineering from the University of Houston and a bachelor's in engineering with specialization in mechanical engineering from Kasetsart University, Thailand. He is currently assistant professor, operation management and supply chain management programs at the School of Management, Asian Institute of Technology. His expertise includes supply chain management, supply chain network modeling and design, operations research, demand planning, and inventory replenishment. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Vatcharapol Sukhotu.
Thank you very much, Dr. Venkatesh, and ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. So it's my honor to be here, in front of many people. Many of you are also senior executives from many companies, academics. So very good to be here. And my topic today is process-driven change, demand and supply planning. I think it's a continuing presentation from the morning, Dr. Gulech Kunpirabun in supply chain management. I think this is part of it, right? Somewhere, somehow, supply chain management has to start. Let's start within our organization, okay? And this is probably the key point here today in today's topics on my presentation, right? So first, let's start with introduction. Supply chain management. I probably will not repeat much of what people have said in today's presentations. And I'm going to jump into also demand and supply planning. And I will use a case study, making supply meet the demand. And then we'll talk about a little bit on the planning process. And then I'm going to end with improving the demand and supply planning and optimization of end-to-end supply chain process. We heard end-to-end again today. So we had end-to-end, and we had end-to-end, and now we can have end-to-end again. So I think that's a very, very important point that we need to make here. All right. But before I start, let me just take my phone, and so I can look at my clock. So I will not go over the time. All right. Okay. So this is the picture of supply chain, just an introduction. I think many people here already know what supply chain is about. So it's about, from what we call point of origin. Okay, if we're talking about some product, it could be, when we dig, the resources from the ground, and ends where it ends at the consumer when we consume the product. So that's the whole supply chain. Okay, so it's from the resources, the supply of the resources, go into the manufacturing, go into the distributor, go into the retailer, and go into the consumer. Okay, so that whole chain is a supply chain that we're talking about. So what is supply chain management? I might have a different version than Kunpirabun, but basically it says pretty much the same thing, right? And this one is by the Supply Chain Council, which also the creator of SCORE that Kunpirabun just presented. And this is by Mensa, okay, which is an academic who actually had a paper about 24 pages long, just talking about what supply chain management is about. And this is the result of that, okay, many years back. And so it's systemic strategic coordination of traditional business functions and tactics across these business functions within the particular company and across the businesses within the supply chain for the purpose of improving the long-term performance of the individual companies and the whole supply chain. So I'm just going to highlight, the key words. So the key word is coordination. Okay? So the thing before that, like strategic, systematic, it's just something just to make this word look better. But in fact, just coordination. So supply chain management is about coordination. Okay? And it's not only within a particular company or organization, it's across the business in the supply chain, meaning from the source to the consumer. Okay, so it's the whole. That's very ideal. Okay, somewhere, somehow we need to start. Okay, and the challenge here is that is the word and. how do we coordinate so that people in the supply chain, when they manage, when they make decisions, it will result in their improved performance as well as other people's performance? That's quite difficult, okay? Because normally we're going to talk, about zero-sum game, somebody gains, somebody loses. But supply chain management, the challenge is how do we make sure that what we do improves our performance and also other people's performance? That's the challenge, okay? Many people, might understand supply chain management is about compromise, okay, or sacrifice for the greater goods of the supply chain, but it's not, because in business nobody sacrifices. Okay, you're not going to make decisions so that you lose something. Okay, everybody will make decisions to improve their own performance. Okay, but how do we make sure that the whole supply chain performance will improve? That's the idea. So it's just going to come into a picture that try to explain that. So suppose that this is the picture of supply chain, okay, the whole chain. So who pays for the supply chain? It's the consumer, it's we, it's us that go and buy products. And then we create the revenues for the supply chain. Okay? But along the supply chain, there's a cost. Of course, along the supply chain, we also create the values. Okay? And that values result in the price that we are willing to pay as a consumer for the products. But along the way, there's a cost. Everybody adds some cost into the products. Okay? Somebody adds a cost. Okay? Maybe we don't want to keep inventory. We might push the inventory to a supplier. Supplier pays a cost. And the cost will be built into the product. Somehow it will go into the product. Okay? If we take the revenue, we minus the cost that occurs along the supply chain, then we get the profit. Okay? So the goal of the supply chain is how do we make sure that we can maximize this profit. Okay? I'm not going to be talking about sustainability and other issues, just a simple business. We want to make profit. Okay. So how can we make sure that that happens? Of course, revenue has to be there. Of course, the cost has to go down. Right? So that's the idea. So let's talk about a case. And I put this case is a beverage company that was involved in this project some time ago. And this beverage company is in Thailand. It's a large one. And the supply chain of this particular company basically starts from the supplier that supplies all the ingredients, the packing materials, and so on, goes into the factory. Okay? The factory is located across the countries. There are so many factories. And then there also are so many warehouses that after they produce, they ship it to each of the warehouses. And then the customers, either they're going to pick the products from the warehouses, or the warehouse will deliver the products to the customer. Okay? So this is the picture of the supply chain of this particular beverage company. So let's talk about then what is the supply chain management of this particular beverage company. All right? So basically there's demand. Basically there will be the supply. Okay? So I'm just going to capture the idea of supply chain management into this word, how to make supply meet the demand efficiently. So why do I say that? Because when you make the supply meet the demand, basically that means the revenue. All right? And then when you make it efficiently, meaning the cost will be down. Okay? So supply chain management is not about managing the cost. It's to make sure that supply and the demand will meet, and that means you're going to generate the revenue. And then you minus the cost that you create along the supply chain. Then you get the profit. Yeah? So we want to make sure that we manage so that we can maximize the performance. And performance, in many cases, are the profit of the company. Right? So what are the issues that we need to think about? Okay? First, forecasting. A business cannot run without you start with the forecasting. We need something to start with. Okay? So we need to make sure that we predict something that we can sell. Okay? And from forecasting, it goes into demand planning. Okay? So how are we going to plan to meet all that demand? Then it goes into the production planning, network planning. Network planning is about where we're going to produce, how we're going to ship it to where. Okay? So that's the network planning. Then the supply planning, storage capacity that we need to have, inventory planning, transfer planning or transport planning that they transfer between the facilities, and then the replenishment planning, right? So these are the supply chain management issues, okay, that this particular company faced. I think every company faces the same thing, right? So let's look at some example. Forecasting first. Yeah? Again, our problem, our issue is how to make supply meet the demand efficiently. Okay? So forecasting, demand has seasonality and it has some fluctuation. Yeah? If we make the wrong forecast, yeah, every planning starts from the forecast. Sometimes we don't know whether it starts from the forecast, we don't know. But in our mind, it starts from the forecast. We think in our mind what's going to happen, and we predict, and then we do the planning. Okay? And so everything starts from the forecast in terms of planning. Wrong forecast basically will result in wrong supply. Because we plan everything according to what we probably forecast. But bad thing is, the forecast is often wrong. Okay, when I teach operations management to my students, I always say the first characteristic of the forecasting is almost always wrong. Okay, who can make the right forecast? It's just like winning the lottery. Just simple as that. Okay, some people may argue, but then we hit the target. We think that we're going to say that's your target. That's not the forecast. You have to separate. Okay, forecasting and targeting or budgeting are two different things. Okay. Forecasting should come before. Okay, you forecast what the market will be like, what the demand will be like, okay, and then you set your own target. That's up to you. You might hit the target, that's fine. Okay, but forecasting, you predict something that is going to happen in the future, and normally it's often wrong. So how we can handle that? But of course, good forecast will increase the chance that you'll be correct. All right. So how to basically, when we manage the supply chain, we need to make sure that how we can change quickly, because many times we get it wrong. But when we get it wrong, how we can change our supply chain to react quickly. Okay, and many times in many organizations, one of the big issues is not a single number is used in the planning. The marketing might plan one number, the production might plan one number. Okay? Let me give you an example. Suppose that we're talking about the automobile supply chain, and then the dealer or the sales part say we're going to sell 100,000 vehicles, and then a particular vehicle has 4 doors. And the supply of the doors, using their own forecasting of the historical information, they forecast that they probably will have to produce 500,000 doors. So basically, you're going to end up having 100,000 doors left. So ideally, we should have a single forecast for the planning. Okay, and that's one challenge. And that's going to be related to the case I'm talking about. Okay? So another one is about production planning. Okay? Of course, demand has seasonality and fluctuation. And in beverage company, this particular one, which is an alcoholic beverage company, a challenge is you cannot change production rate that much. Production has to be quite stable. You cannot just put in the people in and then increase production rate. It's not that simple. You have many things that has to be planned much in advance, okay? And then the capacity cannot be increased without changing the facility. And so how do we cope with the demand with seasonality? For example, in Thailand, the peak season of the beverage company is Songkran, Thai New Year. And also we have International New Year as well. And so how do we produce in advance and keep the stock? Or should we do something else? Okay? At the end, if we produce something in advance and we keep, this is something that we need to think about is inventory cost and storage cost. Or we also need to balance with as well is the manufacturing cost itself. We might be able to change some production level, but it will cost you some money. So how do we balance that? So it's about production leveling and inventory build-up. So how do we balance all that within this organization's or company's supply chain, right? So, of course, even within the same company, like this beverage company, the production people, they don't like to change production level because there's cost. And they also have some output target that they need to meet. So, if they have their way, maybe inventory will be like, a lot exploded, okay? Because they produce too much and might produce in advance. And so how do we make sure that they are willing to actually change something so that the total cost in supply chain will change, okay, or will be minimized? And that's a challenge, okay? So how do we make sure that decisions made by each of the party will result in the maximized performance of the supply chain, all right? And that's one of the key issues, okay? And it will be talked about in later slides. So another issue of the same case is the transfer planning. This is also a supply chain management issue, talking about how should we transfer from one particular source to one particular destination so that the total transfer or transportation cost is minimized. So it's about optimization to minimize the cost. These are some issues, okay, that I give as examples of this particular case. There are so many more issues, okay? But if you capture all these issues of the examples I give you, you can see it's all about how do we manage, okay, the whole supply chain so that the cost is minimized and of course the demand is met by the supply, okay? On this case is by production and so by the supply that needs to feed into the production, okay? So that's the idea of supply chain management within a particular company, how to make supply to meet the demand in the most efficient way, okay? So the need, okay, of this particular beverage company, I'm going to lead into what happens in this particular company. Why do they need to make the change in management of their supply chain? It's increased competition. In the past, they had very few products. You can count maybe only 20 SKUs. But in the future, they're going to hit 1,000 SKUs really quickly. And that's a challenge. Managing 10 products versus managing 1,000 products, okay? SKU means stock keeping units or number of products in case that you're not familiar with this term. Resources to manage. Right now they have a team to manage the planning, okay? When I say right now, it's like right now at that time, before. They had about like 20 people managing that 10 or 20 products. And when I say managing, I mean planning of the supply chain, doing the forecasting, doing the production planning, try to make supply meet the demand. They do it manually, okay? Let's say if they have 1,000 products, maybe they need 1,000 people, okay? That's going to be not quite feasible, right? So resource to manage is the need. Supply chain constraints. They have other constraints like the facility that they have. Okay. They cannot, store products much in advance anymore. They have many more products. Their facilities cannot keep up. Okay. Their storage, their transportation cannot keep up. How do we plan that better? Their factories cannot, keep up with, the demand. How do they gonna optimize the production so that it can meet the demand? So these are the issues that drive the needs for the change, right? So let me give you the picture, and I make this a little bit too simple. In fact, it's much more complicated in the planning. So this is the planning process, right? So it starts with the planning team, which the one that I said that had 20 people managing 20 products. Okay? The planning will do the forecasting, right? And after the forecasting, they will start doing the demand and production and inventory planning. Meaning, after they do the forecast, they will then have to use that forecast to, of course, set the target that they're going to sell. Okay? That target or that budget, some people call target, some people call that budget. Then we go into the top management, okay, to look at and say, okay, they approve this demand plan. This is what we're going to sell. Okay? And then they're going to have to plan the production to match that demand. And then they also, at the same time, plan for inventory. For example, if they want to produce long in advance, then they need to keep some inventory and where they're going to keep it. All right? And so they have to do this whole planning. In academic world, we call this plan aggregate plan. Okay? But in normal term, demand, production, and inventory planning. All right? And then after that, they're going to have to talk to the salespeople so that they can set the target of the salespeople, what they have to sell in each area that they're responsible for. Then they have to talk to the production to say, this is your suggested production plan. And then production or factory then will come back with, okay, this is what they're going to produce in what day or what week. And then after production, they will have to talk to the transportation part and say, this is what we're going to be making, and this is going to be the outputs. And so you better transfer to somewhere that you can store and sell. And then the purchase people, we also need to get this plan to plan for the supply. Okay? So this is the whole supply chain plan captured in a simple picture of this company. And the purpose is to make sure that the supply meets the demand in the most efficient way. And there is one particular process called S&OP, is basically the process, sales and operations planning, to make sure that people in the management level meet and then agree to this plan. Now, what they do, or what they did rather, is to improve this particular process. And they separated into two initiatives. One is called demand planning. Try to tackle how they can plan the demand better. And the second part is called the advanced planning. To tackle how they're going to plan for production, inventory, transportation better, of course, to meet the demand. Okay? So there are two elements into this particular improvement. And I use the word optimizing the end-to-end supply chain process, another end-to-end. Okay? So when we talk about supply chain, we look at end-to-end. Okay? We're not talking about just one particular process. We need to look at the global picture, the end-to-end processes. So what changes in this particular case? As is, the forecasting and demand planning is done with lack of true collaboration. That was as is, or as was. Why? Like I said, before that, they didn't have any system to help gather all the information from different sources. And it takes them hours, days, to actually gather all those information and make a forecast. And so they don't have much time to collaborate with any other people anymore. Just too much time. Okay? The collaboration is built into the forecasting and the demand planning process. And how can they make it happen? Basic system will help. And so they implemented a demand planning system that pulled the data from their ERP system or from different sources. And then within that demand planning system, it has the collaboration module that people can go in and also give comments and then can change it really quickly. And that's collaboration. Many data sources, so spend too much time. The data sources are interfaced. Okay? That's the 2B. Other changes, level of details required are not practically feasible before they implemented this demand planning. Why? Because only that they do at the group level of the data. They spend too much time already. They don't have time to do any much more to detail. And so the level of details required to achieve and enabling better supply chain planning is done because of this change of implementing of the demand planning. Other parts, as is, planning of the demand, production, supply, inventory, storage, and transportation is done with very limited integration. So the key idea of supply chain management is look at end-to-end process. Make sure that you look at the big picture, and then you optimize it to make sure that you have the lowest cost across the supply chain. So you cannot look only piece by piece. You cannot look at just the demand. You cannot look at just the production. You cannot look at just the transportation or storage and try to minimize the cost of each. We need to look at the big picture. Okay? And so, when they implemented this advanced planning process, the planning of the demand, production, supply, inventory, storage, and transportation is integrated into a single plan. So it's not that somebody does the demand planning. It's not that somebody does the transportation planning. It's the whole process is integrated into a single plan. Okay? And it is optimized by the advanced planning system. Okay? With the integration of the demand planning. So they get the input from the demand planning system, and that's the starting point. And then all the supply constraints, all the production constraints, all the transportation constraints along with the cost are put together and then optimized and create a single plan. And of course, everybody now will use a single number. Okay? And that will enable them to actually achieve the lowest cost while still making the supply meet the demand. So the idea is supply, inventory, storage, transportation, and the demand are all put together and optimized in an integrated fashion. Okay? The next one, sales and operations planning, S&OP. I believe many companies now are using this process, but rightly or wrongly, I'm not sure. Okay? Many people will look at S&OP as just a meeting that people come and meet and then say, okay, we can do that, you cannot do that, and then we adjust. But S&OP is basically the month-long process, and there are so many things that you need to be involved. Okay? Sales and operations planning, one of the key successes, you need to have intelligence so that management people can make decisions. Okay? But before they had all this demand planning and advanced planning, the management people had very limited intelligence. So when they want to make change about, okay, suppose that the supply is not enough, how are we going to manage the demand? If the demand drops, how are we going to manage the supply? How are we going to manage inventory? Or the top management, we need to come and then agree to a single plan. But before that, not much intelligence. They don't know if they change this, what is going to be the impact. And so people just do the way that they think is best for them. So with this implementation of demand planning and advanced planning, basically they have intelligence. And the change that they think that they can make can be immediately simulated. And then can give them the intelligence that they need to make the decisions. Okay, about what then be the impact of the cost, what will be the impact of what the lost sales will be, or out of stock and so on. Replenishment decisions, it was done in separation of other plans. Replenishment is like at the end. For example, the warehouse that distributes the product to the customer. When they replenish the product into the warehouse, it doesn't look at any plan before that at all. Okay? But now it's all integrated. And the replenishment decision is done in a way that it looks at the overall plan as well. Okay? So people have visibility of what's going on. Okay? So reaping the benefits of this, first, reduce effort to perform forecasting, demand planning, so they can go into the next step of having many more products so that they can manage. Enable collaboration,